National Nancy's, the fourth in the Alex Reynolds Mysteries. Author Fred Hunter, St. Martin's Press, New York, 2000. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 4. Since I had made such a big deal out of it, I thought our first move should be to talk to David Leach. According to the phone book, he lived just off the bar strip, in the neighborhood affectionately known as Boys Town. Even though parking can be really difficult up there, we took the car with Mother's blessing and drove up to Belmont. From there, we went north up Halstead to Cornelia. David's building was about halfway down the block. We lucked out and found a parking space conveniently located by a fire hydrant and walked back to the big red complex. "I still think we should have called first," said Peter. "I don't know him that well," I replied. "You don't know him well enough to call him, but you know him well enough to drop in on him?" "That makes perfect sense to me." He threw up his hands. "I'm married to Gracie Allen." "I can't explain it. It just seems more plausible to me that we'd be in the area and drop in than it would be for me to call him. What if he doesn't think it's plausible? Then we'll have to play it by ear." There were 4 vestibules in the courtyard of the building. Fortunately for us, in the first one we tried, we found the names Leach Whitfield, which sounded like a Dickensian law firm to me. Taped under one of the doorbells, I pressed the button, and a few seconds later, the inner door buzzed, and we went through. Before we could begin to mount the winding stairs, we heard a door pop open overhead, and a voice called out, "Who is it?" "Dave, is that you?" I called back. "Yeah," was the tentative reply. "Who is it?" "It's me, Alex." "Who?" "Alex Reynolds, from Clark's office." "Really?" There was a noticeable brightening of his tone. "Come on up." Although Peter and I are both pretty light on our feet, the brown carpeted stairs creaked and moaned beneath us, so we sounded like a herd of asthmatic buffalo. We found Dave standing in the doorway on the right on the second landing. He wore a glistening, tight white t-shirt with the short sleeves lopped off, showing off his slight but well-toned torso, and a pair of royal blue shorts. On his feet were a pair of those foot-massaging sandals that reminds me of a bed of nails. "There's 2 of you," he exclaimed when he saw us. "This is my husband, Peter." "Oh! You're the one he's always talking about," Dave said with a sly glance at me, as if he was letting out an embarrassing secret. "Come on in. My boyfriend's out at some potluck thingammy at church. I don't indulge, so I'm here all by my lonesome." From the way he put it, I couldn't tell if he was talking about the potluck or the church in general. The apartment was one of those spacious older ones. There were hardwood floors with matching molding and floorboards that were thick with lacquer. The room was sparsely furnished. Apparently Dave and whoever Whitfield might be didn't have nearly enough furniture to make a dent in the space, which made it look a lot bigger. "I'm really sorry to drop in on you like this, but we were going over to the Melrose for lunch, and I remembered you lived up here, and I thought I'd stop in and see how you were doing." "Oh, I'm doing just fine," he said, looking somewhat perplexed. I mean, I didn't see you after that dust-up with, what the other day, and I was a little worried about you." At my mention of the incident, his expression froze. "I'm fine," he said flatly. "It's just you were gone before I came out of the back, and you didn't come back. What are you, the truant officer?" "I don't have to work there." No, I said placatingly. "I was only worried about you. There was no excuse for the way Jody acted, and I went back there and told her so." "You did?" he said gratefully. I should have done that myself. That bitch didn't have any right. I didn't do anything. I just laughed. What was wrong with that? And she chewed my ass off, right there in front of everybody. She shouldn't have. It's just like one of them, why she did it. You know why she treats us like shit." I shrugged. "That's just the way she is. Because we're men. It doesn't matter whether you're gay or not. She's one of those goddamn dykes where if you're a man, she just fucking tolerates you, and then only if she has to." but she supports Clark. He shook his head vehemently. Only because she thinks he can get her what she wants. If there was a Leslie running for senator, she never would have gone near Clark. It wouldn't matter if it was a flannel-wearing, jack-booted, baby-eating lesbian. She'd support her. I wasn't going to offer a protest to that one, partly because I didn't think it would help get information, and partly because I agreed. Maybe not with the baby-eating part, but with most of it. I know far too many people who will vote for a candidate in their own food group, regardless of the candidate's character. Did you hear what happened? I asked. What? Campaign headquarters was blown up, Peter said. And Dave's face lit up at the news. He looked more thrilled than shocked. Oh, man, I miss all the good stuff. It happened before the office was open, so you didn't exactly miss it, I said. You didn't hear anything about it? On the news? Peter asked. David puckered his face up with distaste. The news? I never watched the news. Way too depressing. He turned to me. So what happened? Well, it looks like somebody bombed the place. The blood drained from his face. You see, I told you. Nobody took those bomb threats seriously. I told you they should have. Actually, he hadn't exactly told me that, although he acted like he was worried. Because they weren't being taken seriously. But I wasn't going to argue the point either. Do you know who did it? I don't think so, I replied. Peter said it happened at 5 o'clock this morning. They don't know anything yet. They've just started asking questions. So what happened when Jody found out about it? David asked gleefully. I bet she went to pieces. Peter and I glanced at each other. I said, David, they think Jody was in the building when it blew. What? He exclaimed again. His eyes widened, making him look sort of like a short-haired Cupid doll. But he still seemed more excited than shocked. I nodded. They're not absolutely sure it was her, but they think it was. Wow. That's incredible. He clapped his hands together and laughed openly. Just think of it. Little bits of bitch blown all over the neighborhood. I'll bet you the property values go down. Dave, I said, genuinely shocked. I know you didn't like her, but come on. I know, he said, waving a limp hand at me. Respect for the dead and all that. But she was a beast, and you know it. Do you expect me to be sorry she's gone? No, said Peter, who looked more appalled than I did. We were just hoping you wouldn't be quite so happy about it. It doesn't look good. What do you mean? The FBI is looking into this, I explained. They'll probably talk to you, of course. I'd see to it that they wouldn't, at least initially. But I thought scaring him a little might help. Besides, I was so completely turned off by his attitude that I wanted to make him squirm a little. They know you were upset with her. How do you know that? He asked. Because they already started questioning people. When they talked to us, they asked us about the incident. He looked panic-stricken. What'd you tell them? I told them it was nothing. He also told them he thought the idea that you had anything to do with it was crazy, Peter added. Dave's head swiveled back and forth between the two of us for a moment. He looked like an animal who'd been locked in a cage with two enemies and didn't know which would attack first. It would be just like that bitch to cause me trouble from the grave, he said at last. This is why you really came here, isn't it? To warn me. Peter looked at me over Dave's head and raised his eyebrows. I almost laughed. Here we'd wondered how we'd explain coming to see him out of the blue, and he'd offered us a perfectly good reason. Yes, that's it, I said quickly, and I can tell you those FBI guys didn't have much of a sense of humor, so I wouldn't let them think you're so happy about Jody dying, especially since they think she might have been the target of the bomb. Really, he said, his eyes widened again, but more soberly this time. He looked down at the floor for a moment and shifted from one foot to the other, like a little boy who has to compose himself to keep from laughing before speaking in front of the class. He looked up at me. I'm not really happy. I'm not. I mean, you don't want to see anybody get killed. I would have liked to slap her once or twice, only if she was on her leash, mind you. But I wouldn't kill her for crying out loud. Who would do a thing like that? That's what the FBI wants to find out, said Peter. The other thing is, I said, adapting the tone of the warning friend Dave took me to be, you should be ready to tell them where you've been since you left the office. It's been 2 days. His voice took on an unattractive whine. I don't know where all I've been. Peter said, well, since nobody's seen you in the office since that incident, they'll probably be more interested in where you've been the past 2 nights. Overnight. Oh, that's easy, Dave said, his relief palpable. I was here, in bed with Sammy. Is he your boyfriend, I asked. He nodded. I cocked my head slightly to the side. I don't know how good an alibi the FBI will think that is. You must have been out of his sight sometime. You could have gotten up in the middle of the night while he was sleeping, gone out. Dave's smile broadened. He went to the mantel over the fake fireplace and retrieved a photo in a small red wooden frame. He handed it to me. That's Sonny, he said, tapping on the glass. Would you have gotten out of bed? The man who stared back at me from the frame was one of the most ostentatiously handsome men I'd ever seen. And he appeared to know it. I imagine he was able to hold Dave in bed, even when fast asleep, by the sheer power of his beauty. I showed the picture to Peter, who replied with a which in this case served as a wolf whistle. Very nice, I said simply as I handed it back to Dave. But would he lie for you? Of course he would. What? Peter and I replied in unison. David looked momentarily confused and said very quickly, Oh, I don't mean that. I mean he would do anything for me. He doesn't have to lie about this. As we walked back to the car, Peter was noticeably pensive, which is usually a sign that something is really troubling him. What are you thinking? I asked. That young man is lucky you stopped the FBI agents from questioning him. What a nasty piece of work he is. He wasn't like that at the office. I don't think we should make too much of it. Lots of people talk like that. We'd gotten to the car, and Peter went to the passenger door and looked at me over the roof. Really, Alex, I'm not sure you should be so quick to write him off. He sounded awfully bitter where Jody's concerned. He sounded downright vindictive, no matter what he says about just not being hypocritical. You'd think when he hears that somebody just got blown up that he'd have the sense to hide the fact that he's happy about it. I gave him a sly smile. You're thinking like a middle-aged man. He growled at me as I disappeared into the car. I leaned over and popped the lock on his side as he got in. I said, Look, I realize you think Dave's attitude is offensive, and so do I. But can you imagine him being able to build a bomb? Peter thought for a moment and then laughed. I can't imagine him being able to operate an easy-bake oven. Where to next? Mary Lynn Hayden, I said with a heavy sigh. Hopefully she's back home now. Alex, she just found out her partner was murdered. I hardly think this is a good time. If we're going to be covert, then this is the best time. We can go in the guise of offering her support. Peter stiffened and slowly turned his face to me. In the guise of offering her support. You're beginning to sound just like those FBI agents, and I don't like it. His tone was enough to reel me in and make me feel a bit ashamed of myself. I was letting the excitement of actually being assigned to a case get the better of me. Thankfully, Peter was there to set me right. I didn't mean it like that, I said. I meant while we're offering her support, maybe we could find out something. That's a little better. But you think we can get information from Mary? I can't believe she kept anything back from the agents. I can. Henry said that Mary didn't know why Jody went to the office at that ungodly hour. But I'll bet she does know, as close as they were. I can't believe that Jody kept anything secret from her. He shrugged. Maybe you're right. You know them better than I do. I looked at him for a few seconds, then leaned over and gave him a kiss. What was that for? He asked with a smile as we righted ourselves. For keeping me on the gay and narrow. Jody was one of the few people working on Clark's campaign whose address I knew. She had held a couple of strategy meetings at her home. There was really no reason to have had them there rather than the office, other than the fact that Jody had wanted to put herself forward as a one-woman source of gentrification. It didn't matter to her that the dilapidated house she and Mary had bought together was in the North and Clyburn area, which was already being redeveloped by a lot of individuals and companies. She had proudly shown us around the little white house that she had single-handedly brought up to code, while providing a constant stream of disdain for Boys Town, which she contemptuously referred to as the gay ghetto. Unfortunately, that happened to be where a lot of the volunteers lived. It didn't make her any more enduring. The house was on Billings, a short side street just off Clybourne, about a block north of North Avenue. When we pulled up onto the gravel indentation that served as a parking space, Mary Lynn Hayden was standing in the center of the picture window, staring out forlornly like an orphan waiting for her lost dog to return home. She showed no sign of noticing us as we got out of the car and went up the walk to the front door. There was no doorbell, so I opened the outer screen door and rapped with the small brass knocker on the inner door. It was about 30 seconds before Mary opened it. "Alex? Peter?" she said faintly. I thought maybe. Her voice trailed off and her eyes were beginning to tear up as she lowered them. "We wanted to see how you were doing," I said. "Come in." She stepped aside and we crossed the threshold. The interior of Mary and Jody's home was so much like a country house that it gave you the feeling a tornado had picked it up and dropped it in the middle of Chicago. The furniture was masculine, all tans and browns, with a large beige couch shoved up against one wall, but there was feminine touches as well. Lace doilies, no less, on the backs of the chairs, and a handmade afghan folded neatly on the couch. Oil landscapes in dark frames dotted the walls. And there was a large square rug on the floor. The living room opened into the dining room, where the huge mahogany table that served as the centerpiece was matched by a sideboard on the far wall. Almost everything in this home was large and heavy. The air was a mixture of lemon polish and stale cigarette smoke. Mary paused to look out the window again, then turned around and said, "Please sit down." Peter and I sat apart from each other at either end of the couch, as if we'd both sensed that any show of closeness on our part would be painful to her. Mary wandered over to the only chair that didn't match the rest of the furniture, an armless seat with a heart-shaped back that sat at an angle to the couch. It seemed almost as out of place in the room as Mary herself. She folded her hands in her lap and crossed her ankles. "It's really nice of you to come by," she said. I couldn't help feeling a twinge of guilt remembering our purpose there. "There hasn't been a great outpouring of love for Jody." "It's early yet," said Peter. "I don't think a lot of people know what happened yet. You'll start hearing from them once word gets around." There was a slight movement of her head as if she'd been about to shake it, but caught herself in time. "Jody's not the most popular woman in the world. I know that. She's very passionate about her beliefs and very outspoken. People don't always understand that, or like it, especially in a woman." This last she added, half-heartedly, as if repeating something she'd been told, but didn't quite believe. "But she had friends," Peter said, carefully modulating his voice so that there would be no doubt he meant it as a statement of fact. Mary raised her grateful eyes to him. "Yes, she did." There was a long pause, during which none of us seemed to know how to proceed with each other. After all, we didn't really know her very well. Finally, Mary said, "I keep thinking it wasn't her. I keep thinking she's going to drive up and come bursting in the door and have no idea why I'm so upset." "Has she ever disappeared before?" Peter asked. Mary shook her head sadly. "I know it was her. She was the one in that office. But I don't think I'm really going to believe it. I mean, really believe it, until the police prove it was her." She stopped and sniffed. "The men from the FBI, when they talked to me, they told me it could have been anyone. That it might even have been the person who planted the bomb. Maybe it went off by accident when he was putting it there. Things like that. But at first, she'd sounded as if she were trying to manage a bit of optimism. But she quickly began to falter. But I know it was Jody. How can you be so sure? I asked as gently as I knew how. She looked up, somewhat startled. What? How can you be so sure? This morning when you found out someone was in the building, you were positive it was Jody. I just know. I can just tell that something's happened to her. But the FBI could be right. It could have been someone else, Peter offered. Then where is she? Mary said with a catch in her throat. It had to be her. I don't know how you can be so sure. Unless you know for a fact that she went there. Mary's eyes glazed over as she didn't want anyone to see inside them. I don't know what you mean. The FBI came and questioned us, I said. They asked if we knew why Jody would be at the office at 5 in the morning. We told them to ask you, and they said you didn't know. She averted her eyes. I don't know. I can't imagine Jody doing anything without telling you. I tried to sound nonchalant, even though I was getting perilously close to asking direct questions. I mean, the two of you never made a move without each other, did you? I thought you could practically read each other's minds. I added the last bit because I thought it possible that Jody hadn't told Mary exactly what she was doing, but Mary might have thought she knew anyway. I was trying to give her an opening through which she might feel more comfortable sharing her suspicions, if that's what they were, but it certainly didn't work. She shifted uneasily in her chair and fixed her glazed eyes on my knee. I don't always know what Jody was doing, she said with a startling lack of conviction. Peter said, Mary, if you know for a fact she was there, you should probably tell the authorities. It might help them find out who did this. She looked up at him, and her expression slowly changed. Apparently, she had reluctantly come to a decision. After sniffing once or twice, she said, I told them I didn't know, but I do. Why not tell them? Jody wouldn't have wanted me to. She fought to hold back tears. I think because she'd forced herself to refer to Jody in the past tense. Why not? Peter asked gently. There was a long pause, then she took a deep breath and responded on a sigh. I suppose it's all right to tell you, you guys aren't with the FBI. I could imagine the internal commotion that one was causing my husband. Mary looked at me. You know how she was, about the opponent. And by the opponent, you mean Fritz Peterson, the Republican candidate? She nodded. Even though Charlie doesn't have the nomination yet, Jody didn't see the other Democratic candidates as a threat because he's so popular, but she was just obsessive about Mr. Peterson. She was trying so hard as she could to find something on him. Find something on him, said Peter. You mean some sort of dirt? She nodded again. Anything that could be used against him. But that's not the kind of campaign Clark is running, I said. I don't think he knows anything about it. You have to understand, Jody really believed that we have to get Mr. Clark elected. She used to say it was for the preservation of the species. Would she go to lengths that Clark himself wouldn't? Mm-hmm. She pulled a small white handkerchief from the pocket of her dress and dabbed at the area just beneath her eyes. But Mary, said Peter, that doesn't explain what Jody was doing in the office at 5 in the morning. We were woken up by the phone this morning about 4 o'clock. Jody picked it up. It was someone. It was someone who said he had a tape that she might be interested in. What kind of tape? A videotape. What was on it? I don't know. She didn't say. All she told me was that he wanted to meet her at the office at 5. That's what she said. I didn't want her to go. I've been so afraid ever since they started calling her here. But you know how Jody was. She paused for a moment to wipe away some tears, then straightened herself in her chair and cleared her throat. Sometimes there was no arguing with her. She really wanted dirt on Mr. Peterson, so she went. There was nothing I could do to stop her. Mary sounded like she was trying to convince herself of this. But why not tell the FBI about this? I asked. If it's true, then there's any number of people who might have wanted to stop her, including Fritz Peterson himself. If the FBI can solve this and it involves dirt on Peterson, then whatever it is will become public knowledge. Mary shook her head emphatically. Jody never would have wanted me to do that. She didn't trust the FBI. She thought they were just as likely to bury it up as they were to air it. I had no doubt Mary was telling the truth. That sounded exactly like something Jody would say. Peter was even more pensive as he walked back to the car this time. He wasn't just silent. There was a stoniness about the silence that made me feel as if it was directed at me. Once we were in the car, he rested his arm against the passenger window, shifted himself sideways as he could face me, and took a deep breath. "I'd like to go on record as saying just how much I object to this little case of yours." "Of mine?" I replied. "We're all on this case." He raised his right eyebrow at me. "You were the one wagging his tail when the FBI approached us, and look at us now. I feel dirty." "Why?" His left eyebrow joined the other. He looked absolutely astonished. "We haven't been doing this for 10 minutes, and already you question your own mother and gotten a grieving widow to compromise herself." "Compromise herself? How?" "Alex, she told us what she knew because she didn't know we were working for the FBI. Well, to be perfectly accurate, you were the one who got her to do that." "What?" he exclaimed, his jaw dropping open. "I tried, but you wouldn't tell us anything. You were the one who got her to talk." "I told her to talk to the FBI." "Well, she did, only she didn't know it." Several seconds elapsed before he shook his head and exhaled through slightly parted lips. "All I'm saying is when she opened up, I felt like we were betraying her. We've questioned people before. Openly, not like this. Not while pretending to be their friends." I looked out the windshield and sighed. I knew he was right. Somehow it never occurred to me when we first started our on-again, off-again relationship with the government that we would ever be put in the position of investigating our own friends. There was something seedy about it. I'd like to think that Peter doesn't have more scruples than I do, just that I'm a little slower to acknowledge them, but I'm probably flattering myself. I said, "I don't suppose it helps to know it's for a good cause." "Not much." "How about this one? We're the best people to do it." He turned back to me. "How do you mean?" "You didn't like the way Henry and Raymond kept referring to our people." "I didn't either. Look, I'll admit I was gung-ho about taking on the job for selfish reasons, but that doesn't mean we're not the right people to do it. I'd much rather we were the ones looking into our friends and acquaintances than those guys from the FBI, wouldn't you?" "I guess," he agreed reluctantly. "Besides, we haven't betrayed anybody. We haven't reported back what Mary told us." "But that's exactly what we're supposed to do. I don't feel right about telling Henry something that was told to us in confidence, something that Mary purposely didn't tell the FBI." "Oh, I don't either," I said with a smile. "And there's no need to." The corner of Peter's mouth slid upward. "What are you thinking?" I shrugged. "We're just supposed to report if somebody in Clark's camp isn't what they seem to be. So far, we don't know anything about that, do we?" Peter laughed with genuine amusement. "You can split a hair closer than anyone I know. It amounts to the same thing. They wanted us to do that in hopes of finding the bomber. We're all looking for the same person. That doesn't mean we have to report any extraneous information that Mary gave us. Nothing she said gives me the impression that somebody in the office isn't who they say they are. How about you?" He shook his head. "Nope." "There. We're saved by semantics." We both laughed this time, and it was good to find ourselves coming back together. But I was beginning to worry that this case might cause us more problems than it was worth. "Oh, God!" I exclaimed, sobering quickly. "I just thought of something." "What is it?" "Given what Mary said, Jody really must have been the target of the bomb. I mean, if somebody called and lured her to the office just before it went off, then it looks like she was what they were after, and what better way to lure her there than by telling her that they had dirt on Peterson?" "That's true," Peter said slowly. "Except there's another possibility. The meeting could have been legitimate." "As legitimate as a clandestine meeting to get dirt on somebody can be," I interjected. "Yeah, the timing could have just been really bad. After all, they haven't been able to identify Jody yet. Maybe there was more than one person in the office when it blew." "That seems awfully coincidental to me. I mean, that a bomb placed by a third party would go off just when the secret meeting is taking place. We were silent for a few moments, mulling this over. Then I sighed. 5 in the morning is just such a weird time to do it. I thought clandestine meetings were almost always supposed to happen at midnight. Only in Charlie Chan movies, sweetheart, Peter replied with a smile. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.